Welcome to Underdubs, a podcast about 70s progressive rock and more. This podcast is a conversational music variety show with a focus on the classic progressive rock artists of the 1970s and how their music has shaped culture, technology, and the music of today. We'll, of course, cover the classic prog bands like Yes and Genesis, but also other forms like the Canterbury scene, neo-prog, proto-prog, and fusion, and all points in between. Your hosts, Brian Donahue and Pat Strawser, are two of the founding members of the instrumental progressive rock fusion band Volare, based in Athens, Georgia, from the mid-1990s. In this episode, we discuss our top 5 Canterbury records. Also, we discuss the musical projects we've both been involved in since Volare's dissolution in 1997, including the Louisville, Kentucky-based group French TV. Be sure to check out the links that we provide in the notes for playlists and other content that we discuss here. We hope you enjoy the show.
So what if we made a list of our top 5 Canterbury albums? What do you think about that?
I think it would be a great idea.
And maybe we have some of the same ones on our respective lists. That will be interesting.
I think it's likely. What are yours?
In no particular order, I think I've got 2 that you would expect me to have, and then a couple of more dark horse candidates. The ones that I think everybody would have on their list of top 5 Canterbury albums are the first National Health record, self-titled. I just think it's a stellar achievement. And I also have the debut Hatfield in the North album, again, self-titled, which I think is maybe when we were younger, it didn't make the same impact on me. But as I've gotten older, I really appreciate that one record more than almost anything in the Canterbury genre. I just think it's a singular work of stellar genius. And I think that any prog fan, any Canterbury fan, any 60s or 70s pop fan could get into it.
I won't disagree. It is brilliant. Love it.
But I also have Opportunity Box by Hugh Hopper on my list.
Oh, that's a good one. I would even say that I can hear some direct influence of that record on some Volare material.
Yeah, that's probably true. And some maybe unexpected ones if we round out the top 5. I really like that album Before a Word is Said, which is Alan Gowan and Friends. Some great compositions on there. And it does sound like it was recorded on a limited budget, which speaks to me as the poor musician, or formerly the poor musician. Still poor, but formerly a musician. That speaks to me. And then finally, in my top 5 Canterbury albums, I think the most unexpected, because there's no organ on this one, is Waterloo Lily by Caravan, which is the record they made. It still has Richard Sinclair on bass and vocals, but it does not have his cousin Dave Sinclair on the what you would expect to be the kind of fuzz organ that's on so many Canterbury records.
Right.
And I do love Dave Sinclair, and I love earlier Caravan, but hey, it's a top 5. I can't pick 15. So pick that one. It's got electric piano on instead of organ for the most part. And I really like it. It's fun.
That is a great record. I actually just listened to it for the first time today.
Really?
I did. And boy, howdy. What year is that record?
Ooh, I wish you hadn't asked me. I'm going to say 73-ish.
Okay.
Because it was maybe the last thing that Richard did before Hatfield.
That makes sense.
72. Wikipedia is telling me 72.
Okay. I can hear 1972 in the production and the overall sound of that record.
Mm-hmm. But what about your list of 5? If you could only pick 5,
if I could only pick 5, I would have to start with Con Space Shanty
Mm-hmm.
with Dave Stewart and Steve Hillage and the other Egg guys. Speaking of Egg, I would pick that one next. The Civil Surface
Ooh.
was a big one for me. I would have to go with the second Hatfield record, Rotters Club, only because I feel like I'm a little more familiar with it, although in some ways it's a bit of a toss-up, if I'm honest. It does bear mentioning that the track Underdub is the namesake for this very podcast.
That's right.
So there's also that. And I think also, that record, the forwardness of the Fender Rhodes really struck a nerve with me, especially since I was such a fond user of the Fender Rhodes during my Volare days. And even to this day, as you'll note by the Fender Rhodes in the background
I
here.
see it behind you.
Yeah. So for those of you that can't see my room here, I have a Suitcase 73 Mark I. And man, it sounds fantastic. So that's 3. 4th would probably be, it's a toss-up between the first and second National Health records. I'm gonna go with Of Cues and Cures, simply because I think it's a more mature sounding record, but I'm not sure that's quite the way to think of it. But I do like the sense of melody and composition that goes on in that record. I think also both records, there's a sense of composition that isn't present in a lot of other Canterbury stuff that I've heard. There's just something about the arrangements that are just they're sophisticated. They're not just complicated, they're sophisticated. There's a sense of development and melody that I really still appreciate even now.
Yeah.
So
there's real composition going on. That's
right. And I would also say that, so the second record, it's replete with a lot of Dave Stewart's buzzy organ solo work. The first one is as well, but like that stuff really kind of settled in with me in a strong kind of a way. The first one gets a special mention simply because of Alan Gowan's soloing on the Mini Moog, especially on tracks like Brujo. That was like,
oh yeah, I love that.
If I listen back to my playing, I'm like, that's me trying to sound like him. And for my 5th pick, it would probably be Gilgamesh, another fine tune. So,
oh yeah, that's a good one.
So a lot of Dave Stewart picks there because he's a huge influence on me. So,
do you remember your younger brother's nickname for the band Gilgamesh? Because we used to rehearse before we moved out into a rehearsal space. We rehearsed at your house, and your younger brother he was never rude about it, but it would have to be a little annoying to have a garage fusion band cranking up day after day. And he saw the Gilgamesh, the first Gilgamesh record with that cool, Snakes and Ladders album cover, really cool cover. And do you remember what he called it?
I have no idea.
Goober Munch.
No. Yes, I do remember that. Oh my gosh!
So he would call us out for sounding like Goober Munch.
That is amazing. Oh my gosh, I remember that now. But oh wow, yeah. Well, we were that would make a good band name, Goober Munch. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe
depends on what market you're aiming for.
Goober Munch. What kind of band would that be? I don't know. That is funny.
Taking you back.
You want to tell us what you've been up to in the intervening years since the close of the Volare chapter?
Yeah, so we were talking about our last gig in 1997 and then a brief reunion in 99. Not a reunion where we played gigs, but just we wanted to finish up a recording together, and it went great. But we knew we were not really getting the band back together. So that's been a long time ago. That's been, 24 years?
Yeah.
So I continued to play drums for years and years and years and years and years. And I've been in all kinds of bands. I finally gave up performing music and recording music about, 6 or 7 years ago now, I guess. Around 2017, probably is some of the last stuff that I did. And so I've been in every type of band under the sun in those 24 years that you can think of as a drummer, except perhaps super straight ahead genre stuff. So I was never in a straight ahead country band, but I did play with people that had kind of alt country leanings, right? Or I never was in a pop band, but I played with people that had that kind of layered in. So the one thing that you could probably draw a line straight through everything that I did as a musician was everything I did was a type of fusion. Nothing I did was straight ahead. Everything was somehow blended. And so for a while I was getting not lucrative session work. So when I say session work, don't get the wrong idea, but for bands, very much under the radar groups with very limited touring and very limited budgets. And I did some cool session work or gigs with lots of different bands, mostly in the indie rock spectrum. And I think I got a pretty good reputation for a while as being somebody that could produce an interesting result behind the drum set on your music. But then that evolved into me being just persnickety enough that I'd say, well, I'll show up for your gig, but I've decided not to play any kick drums. It's just going to be, I'm using 2 hi-hats instead of a hi-hat and a kick drum. Or I remember showing up to one gig and I had decided I was only playing cymbals that night. So, part of that, though, is the freedom of being an amateur or semi-pro musician. Was I always had a day job back in the Volare days and every day since. So I was always, by that token, an amateur musician. And to me, the freedom of being an amateur musician is absolute. And whatever I was interested in, that's what I would do. I mean, so I had all these, if I looked back, I could come up with little distinct phases of my drumming career. That's when I was heavily into electronics. Here's where I was building contact microphones and duct taping them on to my drums and sending them through amps and effects and all this kind of stuff. And here was my little jazz bop kit days where I spent a fortune on collecting ride cymbals, and that was like my thing for a long time. So I did a lot of things, and I ended up in playing super duper duper loud music at the end. And that's one of the reasons why I was like, maybe it's time to give it up, because I was worried my hearing was going to get damaged. I was wearing foam earplugs in my ears, but also those air traffic controller earmuffs, like the guys directing the plane on the runway, those guys, the firing range earmuffs. I was wearing those on top. And it was still just, I remember some rehearsals where I couldn't even hear my own drums. I knew I was striking them because I could feel it vibrate when my arm, when my hand hit the snare drum, but I just couldn't hear it. And that was cool. That was what we were doing. It was fun. But at the same time, I thought, maybe this is a sign that it's time to either every 4 or 5 years, I kind of evolve and switch my kit around and try something else. Maybe it's time for me to either switch things around and try something different, or what if I didn't even do that? What if I just stopped playing? And that's where I've been for the last 6 or 7 years, where I still own all the equipment. But my phone hasn't exactly been ringing with people trying to get me out of retirement. So I think it's pretty permanent at this point.
Well, are there any particular groups that you worked with that are worth mentioning? I'd be curious to know what some of those are and what, like, stylistically, how you describe any of them.
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, everything I did at the time I was into, for sure. The problem with having your entire musical career be under the radar of commercial record labels and stuff is, 15, 20 years down the line, it's hard to find some of this stuff. If you weren't at the show, if you didn't see us in Columbia, South Carolina in 2003 or whatever, and you didn't buy the CD, well, it may be hard to find us now because it may or may not be online.
Right.
It may or may not be streaming. It may or may not be on YouTube, for example. But yeah, some of the bands I was in, gosh, going back. So Steve and I were in, Steve from Volare and I were in a quartet called Matter Eater around the year 2000, which had great potential. I mean, a great band, kind of a math rock band. The indie kids will know what I mean with the math rock reference. Proggy, but heavy rock. But unfortunately, we were so poor, we never recorded anything, not even a note, nothing. Just some rehearsal tapes.
Really? Wow.
Nothing. Yeah, nothing.
That's
and Steve wrote some really cool songs. So Matter Eater, I was in a band for a while called Shadow of a Great Name, which was an instrumental trio. And we did 4 self-release CDs that are good and interesting, I think. I played as kind of a sideman for all kinds of bands up in the Raleigh, North Carolina area where I am now, where I've been for almost 25 years now. And let's see, I did a band called Starmount. It's another instrumental band, a quartet, where the main instrument was pedal steel guitar, and that was a pretty interesting band.
Yeah, excellent.
And we
excellent
did
stuff.
one. Yeah, thanks. We did one CD, and unfortunately, it fell apart before we could finish the other one, or it fell apart before we could start the other one, the follow-up, unfortunately, as many bands do. And lots of other little things, but also I ended up with a band called Alphacop, of which I was a founding member of that, and that was a quartet or 5-piece sometimes, which went from extremely heavy and loud stuff to very quiet experimental stuff, and including some kind of proggy influences that I kind of snuck in there whenever I could.
Good man.
Because it never goes away. Your love of Close to the Edge and Lamb Lies Down on Broadway side 3 or whatever, it never goes away. Sometimes it just pops out.
It's in your DNA, man. It's can't get rid of it.
But how about you, Pat? You've been extremely active and you still play. I've retired from music, but you are still very active.
I am very active. I would say immediately following the Volare days, I played with a kind of a fusion pop soul band that never recorded a proper release. We were called Atomic Cafe. And we had, if Volare was the creative prog rock, who cares what people think about it? We don't care if we tour or make any money. This band was kind of the exact opposite of that. We were like, we want to get a record deal and all this kind of stuff. That never happened. That's maybe one day I'll tell you the whole story. We played some cool music. We wrote some interesting stuff, but it was it was an interesting experience. But that lasted about 2 years, and then I worked with a couple of other original artists. One was called Rock and Roll Summer, which was sort of an indie rock inspired band. I would compare them to a cross between Jonathan Richman, The Cars, and the Beach Boys. Sort of a kind of poppy but lo-fi, keyboards with no reverb kind of thing, and very minimalistic. I did a couple of records with that guy, and got involved with some church music off and on, probably starting around that period where I would play at churches, and that became a thing that was later on was a paid position. So that was I was like, oh, I can make money at this. That's cool. Not that there's a kind of a strange tension there between, well, but you're doing it at church. Should you get paid for that? And let me tell you, you should. And around that time, I also started dabbling in playing like jazz gigs and stuff at the country club, but only every now and then. And I would say up until about 2008, my involvement in live music was very limited. I got married and had a son in that time. And then around 2008, I got back into it. And from that point on to now, I've been primarily involved in wedding bands and in tribute bands. I've done a lot of other stuff, but it became a matter of occupation, like a matter of employment. So I dove into the tribute band scene pretty heavily, and I've been working with an Elton John tribute since about 2011, and we travel all over the country. He does a lot of stuff internationally. The guy who plays Elton, I'm just the keyboard player, so I do all the non-piano keyboard work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I've seen you do that, and you do it very well.
That's
it was
right.
A very convincing show. I've seen you twice, I think.
I think so. That's right. Yeah, we played up in the Raleigh area a couple times, and that's a really fun show. It's a pretty short list of original artists that I've worked with that. I have done my fair share of that. I even worked with Otis Redding on a couple of studio dates.
Really?
Yeah. Otis Redding Jr. That. Yeah. So not the original one. No, it wasn't a seance.
I was going to say it would take some real spooky action to make that
I also
happen.
had the opportunity to work with Davis Causey of Sea Level fame before his passing it was earlier this year, but I actually got to, he and I collaborated a good bit in the studio here and there, and I played on his last record, which is kind of cool. And he even played some guitar parts on a tune that I wrote. So yeah, I've stayed very active. I maybe the most noteworthy original artist that I could bring up would be, aside from my own work, would be that of French TV, which you and I also have a pretty strong connection with. So starting in around 2017, Mike Seri from French TV, the Louisville, Kentucky-based progressive rock band of, going on 40 years. He's been at it since 1983. He has produced, to date, 15 records under that name. And I got involved doing work on his records in 2017 was when he approached me and said, hey, I've got a record. I'll send you a track. And at the time I was trying to, get like a studio together so I could do stuff from the house. And I listened to it. I'm like, no, I can't do this. This is too complicated. I was in the headspace of, is this like a Bruno Mars song? Well, not with Mike at the helm. Nothing that modern or simple or something, but it wasn't like a song in the way we think of, verse, chorus, bridge, something like that. It was like this, this rhythm track that was about 10 minutes long, and every 4 bars, the rhythm track changed to something just completely bananas, a different meter or different. It was just crazy, and I didn't know what to do with it. And then he approached me about a year later, and he's like, well, you want to try it again? And I said, okay, I'll try it this time. And we've been at it ever since. And so we actually just released our his 15th record and my 4th release with him since joining the group. So it's called A Ghastly State of Affairs, and it is available on Cuneiform Records. Wow,
that's cool.
And I highly recommend it.
Nice. I haven't checked it out yet, but yeah, I'm a French TV alum myself, going back to
That's right.
1997, I think, 97 or 98, or right? Somewhere around there. I played on, I think, the 6th French TV album, which is a studio record called The Violence of Amateurs. But I'm not the only drummer on there. I'm on three or four songs. 2 or 3 or 4 songs. I can't remember. 3. I think I'm on 3 songs. And we also had plans to do a Midwest tour, which unfortunately fell through. I think we did 1 gig at that time. So it was in a short-lived lineup. And then many years later, 2012. So this is still predates your involvement in French TV. I got the call to be the substitute drummer for a European tour, which I was very happy to do. And I tried my best to learn the music in a short period of time, and hopefully I did okay. I had a great time on the tour. Hopefully Mike hasn't written me out of his will because of how I played or how I behaved. But it was a good experience. And we'll have to get Mike on our podcast sometime to talk about it, because we had recorded the gigs of that tour, especially in France. I remember recording a bunch of gigs on a laptop. And then at a gig in the south of France, some gypsies stole the laptop and they got away with it. So there's a missing, unheard French TV live album from 2012 that, is gone with the wind.
There's an album title in there somewhere. Look out, the gypsies are coming. Look out, the gypsies are coming. I don't know that story. I want to hear it though. Well, and I think it bears mentioning that you and I have a great deal that we owe to Mike Seri, because I think he was kind of pivotal in giving us a bigger national audience. Because when we did our debut cassette, self-titled EP in 1996, he hosted us at a progressive rock festival, I guess you'd say, in Louisville, called the Eclectic Electric Event.
That's right.
And French TV played, and he let us crash on his couch. And I guess, I don't know if he heard us and compelled the promoter to invite us, or what exactly.
I don't remember. I think Steve Roberts was the other guy involved in the event, right? So
that's right.
Steve Roberts of ZNR Records. And I may have already been talking to him just as somebody who purchased some of his music. I don't know if that's how we made the contact with Mike Seri and French TV. So it was after that they came down to Athens to play with us, right?
That's right. Yeah, they did a couple of shows with us. They played in Athens and in Atlanta at the Somber Reptile.
Oh, that's right.
With the post-Echoland trio still, that was in short order renamed to Always Almost, featuring Brett Cull and Ray and Paul. Their last names evade me at the moment, but so Paul, Ray, and Brett came down and did a show with us in Atlanta with Mike and company, and they did a show with us at the 40 Watt. And so our affiliation with both groups kind of continued. Well, French TV in particular. So, we tip our hat to Mike Seri and hope deeply that he will join us and give us some more tea on on the case of the missing laptop, because I want to hear that story.
He's got a bunch of stories. I mean, French TV having been around for so long, he's probably got some stories about me that I haven't heard.
Yeah, well, and I even did a show with him pretty recently in 2018. We after we did after he got me on the roster for doing these records, not long after, he said, "Hey, what do you think about doing a gig?" I'm like, "You're crazy, because this music is impossible to play, or at least it is for me now, because I play Bruno Mars songs. I play, just pop songs and stuff at weddings. So this is complicated, and I'm not no." But he ended up cajoling me into doing it, and we learned a bunch of tunes. I drove up to Louisville this was in 2018, and we rehearsed for a couple of days, and then played at Progtoberfest at Reggie's in Chicago, and played with we played in front of the Paul Wertico Quartet.
Oh wow!
Yeah, they were amazing. The guy's name escapes me. The keyboard player and harp player for Bela Fleck.
Oh, Levy, is that his last name?
Yes, Howard Levy. Right.
Yeah.
So he played with them, and that was amazing. Soft Machine was the headliner, as it turned out. And they had two rooms. They had a big room where all like the big bands played, and then a smaller room, like more of a club, people eating wings and burgers and stuff. But it was good fun, and we learned a bunch of those tunes to play live, and it was kind of insane because it was a lot of fun. I have to admit, I had a lot of skepticism because I was kind of out of that scene for a while. Like I've done my share of like fusion group stuff, playing jazz, kind of prog adjacent type stuff. And I don't mind playing complicated things, but it was like, that stuff is complicated. It's just lots of parts, lots of stuff to remember. I actually I compiled charts just for the tunes that I helped to write, even because I remember when we were making the record, I distinctly remember thinking to myself, because when you're recording, you can, I'll have 3 Minimoog lead lines on this part, because I'm never going to play it live. I can stack as many keyboard parts as I want. Well, when Mike's like, "Hey, what do you think about playing all that stuff?" I'm like, "What? I never thought I was going to have to play this. You're crazy." But we made it work. It was a lot of fun. It was the music really came alive. And it made me miss doing that kind of stuff, just because it's so it's a little bit like standing on a cliff and jumping off of it into midair and wondering if you're going to survive, because
it could also be nerve-wracking.
It's
but on
definitely
a good night,
that.
It feels good. And one thing that I just recalled is on my French TV tour, we were in either in Germany or in Spain. I forget. I think it was in Spain. I think we were in Barcelona. And before the show, this guy came up to me and said, "I drove 300 miles to come see you play drums because of I love the Volare CD, The Uncertainty Principle." And I thought, holy smokes, amazing. Wow. Well, I hope you like it. And after the show, I didn't see him again. So he may have bailed when he saw how I actually play in real life.
I highly doubt
but
that.
I hope he enjoyed the show. Maybe he had to leave because he had such a long drive home.
300 miles. Wow. Well, that's pretty spectacular. I think that is one thing you can say about this kind of music. The people that love it, they really, really love it. And they'll do that kind of stuff. And it's, in a lot of ways, that is reward enough. Thanks for joining us again on this episode of Underdubs. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.